And now David will give us our scripture.
A reading from the letter of Paul to the Galatians. My brethren, if anyone be found at fault, you who are spiritual, restore him in a spirit of meekness, and be careful lest you also be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if any man thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let every man examine his own work, and then may he glory within himself alone, and not among others. For every man shall bear his own burden. Let him who is taught the word become a partaker with him who teaches all good things. Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that also shall he reap. He who sows things of the flesh, from the flesh shall reap corruption. He who sows things of the Spirit, from the Spirit shall reap life everlasting. Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all men, especially to those who belong to the household of faith. Now, Reverend McCauley will give us our lesson sermon.
Thank you, David. Today's lesson is called Keeping on the Path. In today's scripture, we heard verses from the epistle of Paul, the apostle, to the Galatians about how whatever a man sows, so shall he also reap. It's been over a month since my last sermon, and a lot has happened since then. We've had our political conventions. The vice presidential candidates have been announced. The presidential race has gained a great deal of momentum and incited a lot of debate in the country. As well, we've had a series of hurricanes and challenging weather scenarios, and even a few earthquakes around the world. Just 2 days ago, 2 trains collided on the same track in Chatsworth. Prices of consumer goods have increased noticeably to the extent that many of us are modifying our lifestyles, changing our spending behavior, and reordering our priorities. The Gulf Coast has seen several massive evacuations, and people seem to be taking the warnings more seriously than ever. Yet here in sunny Southern California, our weather has been great, perhaps a bit warm, and while we're facing possible water shortages, there is no lack of water at this time. Now more than ever, it's important to remember the simple things that give our lives joy and purpose. Meditation is one of those simple practices which gives our lives meaning. When you wake up in the morning, is your first thought, gee, I can't wait to get up and get into meditation? Or maybe, I wonder what God has in store for me this day. Or are you more concerned about the problems you might face that day? Most of us have experienced the fruits of meditation. We know that meditation clears the mind, relaxes the body, soothes the spirit and soul, allows us to focus our attention on a particular subject. It centers us in such a way that we're able to concentrate our efforts on the task at hand in order to resolve or improve a given situation or circumstances. We know that taking the time to meditate produces benefits, many of which we cannot measure, yet we know benefits come from meditating. In spite of our knowing that we get benefits from meditation, we often convince ourselves that we don't have time to meditate. We'd rather sleep an extra 20 minutes than get up and take that extra time to center our mind, calm the body, and realize radiant, vital, dynamic health, the abundance of enough and to spare for our every need, and to fill our universe with harmony. We're told that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. It fortifies our bodies, giving us nourishment to get our day started. I know I've skipped many breakfasts, thinking I would save time, grabbing a snack later along the way, sometimes with success, and at other times just forgetting about it entirely. After observing that habit and making an effort to always begin the day with a variety of foods, I find that I feel better after having had a good breakfast. The same is true of meditation. If I stay up extra late the previous night, my first thought upon arising is, what task can I eliminate from my morning routine so I can stay in bed longer? Meditation usually tops that list, and it's easy to say that I'll do that later or another day. Yet by sacrificing that personal time, I know that I'm not at my best for the rest of the day, or at least until I've actually taken the time to do the work. We're told that if we're flying in an airplane and the oxygen masks appear, we should put our own mask on first and then help others. This makes sense because if you can't breathe, you can't help others. Ultimately, you need to take this same advice in relation to your mental and spiritual health. Center yourself, and then you're in a position to help others. If you're emotionally unstable or out of balance, you can't help others. Meditation puts that balance back into your life. In our healing unit, we remind ourselves that we are an inseparable part of God. Each one of us is an inseparable part of God. One could say there is that of God in each one of us. And it's our job to look for that part of God in our friends, neighbors, adversaries, and even those whom we might not be very pleased with at the moment. Regardless of who your choice is for president, you also know that there is that of God in all the candidates. And while it may not be that easy to see, it's there if you look hard enough. Are you able to see that of God in each of the candidates and their vice presidential choices? At our Thanksgiving and Christmas candlelighting services, we employ the tradition of lighting the light of the God within as we pass the candle around the room and light each other's candle. The act of passing the flame from one soul to the next and of lighting the light of the God within is a symbolic as well as a physical act. We do this at Thanksgiving and Christmas to remind ourselves that one of our duties on the planet is to light the light of the God within every day, when we meet old friends, when we make new friends, when we attend meetings or classes, or wherever our experience takes us. It's up to us to make the effort to see that of God in each other and to honor that God within. It's especially important to do so at the time when it's the most difficult. For example, in listening to the presidential candidates, we may have already chosen sides, and we may hear the opposition making arguments with which we don't agree. That's the time to say, I don't agree, but I recognize their right to have an opinion, even if I think they're wrong. When you're convinced someone is wrong, it can be difficult to allow them their freedom of expression. But that's what makes this country great. We can each have our own opinion and still live together reasonably harmoniously. Before we took a break for the summer, we were talking in class about the importance of the breath and breathing, and we reviewed the lessons in Course 4 on breath. Breathing deeply is one of the most important exercises you can do for yourself. You may want to go back and reread those lessons on breath in Course 4 if you've forgotten them. As we go through our daily lives, it's easy to get caught up in a pattern of shallow breathing, and by not filling our lungs to capacity frequently, we're not fortifying ourselves physically and realizing the level of health of which we are capable. One of my college professors used this analogy. A car may have 8 cylinders, but if the engine isn't maintained and cleaned regularly, the cylinders and spark plugs get dirty, and one by one, the cylinders stop firing efficiently. If the car is operating on 7 cylinders instead of 8, acceleration isn't its best, but you can still get from point A to point B without much trouble. You can manage with 6 or even 5 or 4 cylinders, but at some point, when you try to accelerate, there will be a noticeable failure to perform.